Hello, listeners. Jordan here. I just want to let you know that you can listen to Nighttime early and ad-free on Amazon Music. Include it with Prime.
You are listening to Canadian Gothic, a series by the Nighttime Podcast.
Hello, listeners. The story that's going to be discussed tonight takes us to Pickering, Ontario. During the early morning hours of March 17, 1995, a group of 6 teenagers left a house party with plans to goof around at a nearby marina. Security cameras at the marina show 3 of the 6 boys entered just prior to 2 a.m. They, nor the other 3 boys, have been seen again since. The only evidence suggesting their possible whereabouts was 2 reports of stolen watercraft. In this episode of Nighttime, I've invited Canadian crime content creator Madelayne Klein to help me try and understand what may have happened to the Pickering Lost Boys. So let's get into it.
It was March 1995 when Jay Boyle and 5 of his friends went out for a night of partying. It's believed they stole 2 boats from the East Shore Marina here at Frenchman's Bay. Then they went out into the cold waters of Lake Ontario, never to be seen again. They were dubbed the Lost Boys because no amount of searching ever resulted in their discovery. All that was found was a gas can near Wilson, New York. It came from one of the stolen boats.
Madelayne Klein, it's a
Hello.
pleasure. It's a pleasure to have you here tonight. And I just finished laughing at your latest video. You talked about how does it take me an hour to make a 10-minute video, and then you posted some outtakes with your adorable cats climbing all over you as you tried to record.
Well, and it's funny you bring that up because look, you can see his shadow right now, actually. Come here.
Do your cats just follow you around the house all day?
Pretty much.
Oh,
They
man.
just hang out, and sometimes they get a little, for like an hour a day, they get like squirrely. Otherwise, they just fight each other and hang out. Yeah.
Just a bit of cat talk here is my brother has a Himalayan Siamese, and
Ooh.
he often talked about he called it the 11sies, and he said every night around 11 for an hour my cat's crazy. Do your cats have the 11sies?
It's more like the sixies, just right
Oh.
after supper.
Okay.
They start, especially we have a big black cat.
Mhm.
And he just like darts around the house, and he's so big. He's like a bull in a china shop. And yeah, he's
Oh, and then you got the big long sleek leopardy tigery looking thing.
there he is. Oh, good. I think he's gonna settle right away here.
Oh, well, let's not
So,
disturb him. How have you been? What's new? What's going on?
I've been good. Nothing too new and exciting. It's been beautiful here. It's like spring here. I've driven home with my window down 3 days in a row.
What?
I know. I'm not sure if a climate's supposed to fluctuate like this, but you know what? I'll take it.
Yeah, well,
So,
I don't know if it's much different on the West Coast, but on the East Coast, they're always like, if you don't like the weather, just wait 15 minutes.
that's exactly
And
what they say over here.
that's the same thing. I think everyone says that. They're like, where I live has the craziest weather
Just like everyone says where they live has the worst drivers.
or the best pizza.
Oh my God, you're right.
Because my hometown actually has the best pizza in Canada, Cape Breton.
Is this like officially on a list?
Yeah, a list that I made of the best pizza. Number 1 is like my preferred hometown pizza. Number 2 is the other hometown pizza that I get. But are you saying that Regina has good pizza?
Well, it's like kind of a thing over here because I guess we have.
It's a thing everywhere. I don't even want to hear it. It's a thing everywhere. Everyone says they have the best pizza in their town.
I guess we're the only ones with Greek-owned restaurants, and we have like this special Greek pizza. I don't know.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah.
Pizza and where the best pizza is almost like this religious thing. It's like it gets passed down from. It's like I was raised to know that the type of pizza that my family prefers is the one in my hometown.
I think
So
you're
it is
right.
just like it's like a part of me, and I think that's why pizza stores they do so good and they last forever. Like it seems, restaurants come and go, but pizza shops seem to be forever.
That's true. Now that you say that, we're all really
And
living the same lives in different houses.
and thinking it's special where we
Yeah,
live.
right.
Well, I don't know if anything. I don't think much has been up with me, much interesting. I finished watching. I told you I was watching the Netflix special, The Watcher, which was pretty interesting. The first three episodes, it's like I don't know, 6 or 7 part series. The first 3 episodes were amazing. But then when it got to the point that they were kind of having to tie up loose ends and start explaining stuff, it sort of started to fall apart,
The
which,
wheels started falling off.
well, that's the thing with it. I don't know if you watched the TV show Lost, but I say a lot of shows suffer from like what happened to Lost, which is like making a mystery and not explaining it is so like gripping and captivating. But when you eventually get backed into a corner and you're like, all right, explain all this crazy stuff you've been showing us. It's like, well, there was a time machine and
Oh,
it's like, okay, forget it. I'm done.
you lost
Uh,
me.
yeah. But that's kind of like what happened with
Oh,
the show I've been watching. But anyway, let's get into it. This is not why we're here. We're here tonight to talk about a case that I've been meaning to cover on this show pretty much since the show has started. That's the story is the Lost Boys of Pickering, or the Pickering Lost Boys, or the Lost Pickering Boys. Multiple ways that I've seen this kind of phrase, but there's a few things that make this story unique. As much like last time we spoke about a missing persons case, we talked about the entire Jack family disappearing. In this episode, we're going to be talking about a group of 6 friends, 6 boys from Pickering that range in age from 16 to 18, that all together, collectively, at the same time, completely disappear without a trace, which is quite something else. It's, 6 people. That's a big thing.
and yeah, to not leave any shred of evidence is bizarre.
Yeah, absolutely. I've heard of this case from multiple from multiple points of view. One is listeners reaching out saying, you should do something on the Pickering Lost Boys. But also, I actually lived in Pickering for a period of time, so I was kind of vaguely familiar with it. My mother lived in Pickering, which is on the outskirts of Toronto. So much like a lot of people in Pickering, she had this big house in Pickering, and then every morning she'd get up early and get on the GO train and the subway and all this other stuff to eventually go downtown Toronto to work, in a big tall building somewhere. But I would spend the summers in Pickering with my mother, and it was unlike anywhere in Nova Scotia. Pickering is like true suburbia. There would be where my mom lived, I would stand like, I don't know, on the top of a hill, and for as far as the eye could see, it was like the exact same house, the same design, just one after the other with
Just
no yards,
cookie
just
cutter.
forever. Oh yeah, but forever. Like my mom's neighborhood was like these giant houses, again, just as far as the eye could see, with the same color brick and the same roof. And being where I'm
Weird.
from at Cape Breton, it looks like, every house is from like a different era. And one house would have like, one half of the house is pink and the other half is like brick. And, it's just like a crazy town. I go to Pickering, I'd be like, oh, man, these people are organized.
Just polar opposites of what you're used to.
Yeah, certainly. But I remember, like, other than just the little things about Pickering, I remember being told the story of the Pickering Lost Boys by, like, one summer I was there, like, again, spending the summer there. I think I was skateboarding and met some kids in the neighborhood, and this probably would have been like 98 or something. So this story would have been fresh. And I remember someone telling me the story of this, group of boys that had disappeared just a couple years prior, and no one knows what happened. And it's like unsolved mysteries. And I never really dug too deep into the story. And then when I started the podcast Nighttime and had it recommended and requested a few times, I've always put off learning the story, being like, I'm going to wait till the time comes that I sit down and cover it, that I read about it. So I'm really coming into this fresh. I've only spent the last probably 3 days reading things and learning for the first time, like, what actually happened in this case. And yeah, I see why so many people talk about this and cover it, because it's fascinating and it's a pure mystery. Do you remember how you learned about it? Because you covered it on your YouTube, I believe.
I did. I covered it on, yeah, TikTok, YouTube. It's actually my most successful series on TikTok. It's
Isn't that
got,
something?
yeah, the first part has like 500,000 views or something like that. So
Okay.
it's very annoying. Anyway,
So when we're
but
done here, you're going to go fix your old video?
Pretty
that what you're
much.
saying?
I'm like, oh,
Yeah.
do I delete this?
No.
But I can't, I'm trying to think. I can't remember how I would have first heard about them. I imagine someone suggested them to me.
Mhm.
Um, and I'm sure I've read about them at some point, but someone probably suggested them, and then I looked them up and thought,
Is
I
that
don't
how most of your topics come from, listener or viewer
know, a
suggestions?
lot, yeah.
Yeah, mine, I kind of got that way now, but it wasn't initially. But a lot of what happens to me is like I spend so much time working on the podcast that if something pops up in the news that I'm interested in, I can't like stop what I'm doing and follow it unless I'm going to cover it. So something interesting will happen in the news that I want to follow. So I'm like, I guess I'm making an episode about that next week. And that happens to me a lot. But the Pickering Lost Boys, I certainly got a bunch of emails about it and recommendations and requests. But you mentioned it was your most successful video, and in a way it surprises me, but in a way not. What surprised me is when I was trying to do research on this case, find articles and whatnot, I was finding more videos of like YouTubers and TikTokers and bloggers covering it than I was of like mainstream media. Like it seems like, yeah, there's your typical articles on the anniversary every year. Somebody wrote a book or two about it, but for every like article that had, firsthand interviews with, one of the missing boys' parents or siblings or something, I'd find 5 videos on YouTube of, someone just recounting the details of the case, which is kind of wild. Like
That's
in
what
a
I noticed
way,
the first time I covered it.
yeah, in a
Is
way
yeah.
it's high profile, but then in a way it isn't.
I wonder if there was a specific video or someone covered it, a creator covered it a couple years ago, and I wonder if that just like was a trajectory into putting it back into people's minds, or
It could have been, yeah. Like if
yeah.
because you see that especially in podcasting, if one of the big shows cover, whatever Paul Bernardo's crimes or something, you will see all of these like smaller podcasts will cover it in the upcoming weeks because everybody is again talking about this case again. Yeah, it could very well be something like that. But
But you know what?
I'm
Even I was surprised when I first covered it on TikTok. A lot of the comments were, "I'm from Pickering and I've never heard of this," and I'm like,
isn't that something?
Pickering is not that big. Like,
No, but this
so I
this
was
happened
really
a
surprised.
Yeah, but it's yeah, stories fade fast.
That's true.
And when you think of a story in 1995, me, that doesn't seem like that long ago. I was having cigarettes in Pickering in 1995. When you think of it, that's almost 30 years ago. So there are a lot of people that are writing those comments on TikTok, like unless their parents told them about the Pickering Lost Boys,
True.
um, in lieu of like a Netflix documentary or something reigniting the case. Yeah, a lot of people would learn about that for the first time. I get that a lot. I'll cover something from my hometown or some city that in Canada that for me is like a well-known story, and I'll hear from people there like, "Well, I'm from there, and I had no idea." I'm like, nothing else has ever happened in your town, and you don't know about the one like thing that happened. Like
There's
what?
been a few stories like that. I'm like, huh,
Huh?
amazing. Yeah.
Yeah. We'll start getting into it here. We said a bit already. This takes place March 17th of 1995. The time of year I think is important because this story, for better or worse, is going to take us onto the water of Lake Ontario. I couldn't imagine going in a boat in the middle of the night in March because it's like Ontario. It's not like it's cold. That would be cold, right? Doesn't seem like a water time of year to me.
Oh, definitely not. But it's not like they were planning on going swimming.
Yeah, and we'll get into that if they even went in the water. So that's a whole other kind of can of worms. But the story centers around 6 boys. There is Danny Higgins, the youngest of the group at 16 years old. Chad Smith, the oldest, 18. Jamie Lefebvre, 17. Michael Cummings, 17. Robbie Rumbold, 17. And that is a wicked name, Robbie Rumbold. Sounds like a
It's like a
football
wrestler.
player. Yeah. And then there is Jay Boyle, 17. And when you read about this story, it seems like Jay Boyle is the one, for whatever reason, a lot of what's written is about him. Maybe that's because his family and partner have spoke out more publicly than others, perhaps, or also it could be because he had a young child. He had a daughter at the time that this happened, and he went missing. And a lot of people will say, you know, Jay never would have left willingly and left his daughter behind. You know, something happened. They didn't run off to the States or some crazy thing like that. But again, Jay Boyle, for whatever reason, seems to be the most prominently discussed of the group of them. I haven't been able to learn too much about the boys other than, again, what I said about Jay having a child. But overall, it sounds like they're regular 17-year-olds, maybe leaning a bit more towards the wild side. Thinking like, you know, stealing boats is something that it sounds like they've done at least 2 or 3 times. That to me is you know, that's a bit of a wild thing. When you read about their lives and what they were up to, I think they were like, it kind of sounded like they were 17 going on 21, or, you know, if that makes sense.
Yeah, they sounded like fun. I'm not condoning what they did, but they sounded like a lot of fun.
Hmm.
To me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, to you when you're 17.
Right, exactly.
I have a feeling tonight you don't have any wild plans.
Oh, no.
As you're
No.
surrounded by cats with your new shelf behind
Yeah.
you. Wait till you see. But yeah, it's like when you hear, I think when people hear this story, there's probably going to be someone who listens who says something like, if you do something stupid and illegal and, you know, I think what they were up to that night probably wasn't completely out of the ordinary for what a group of 6, 17, and 18-year-olds get up to when they're out on their own late at night,
Right.
drinking and whatnot. Because this story starts at a house party. I couldn't figure out too much about the house party other than it wasn't like a get together. I've heard 50 to 100 people at someone's house, which to me is a pretty big party. Is
That's a
my
shaker.
understand That's shaker. Is that your understanding? Is that it was something pretty significant?
Oh yeah, no, I wasn't under the impression it was just like small gathering.
Okay. I've heard,
because it was spring break.
yes, that's right.
Yeah.
So this
So
would have
they
been,
were like, because I think I looked on the calendar and March 17th was like a Tuesday or something like
okay.
that. So yeah, they were having a good time.
Yeah, in March break, that's a week of Saturdays for anyone who has
Exactly.
not celebrated March break. So Tuesday was Saturday on March
Exactly.
break. They're at a party. It's just before 1 a.m. that the group, or I think 5 of the 6, leave the party and tell some others, we're going to go to the marina to screw around a bit, I think is about what they said. Does that make sense to you?
So that also tells me this is not the first time they've done this.
Yeah, I think what they said was goof around on a
On a
boat or
boat.
goof around at the marina, but they've at least made it clear we're heading towards the marina or the waterfront or where the boats are, which in Pickering, there's kind of like a park area where there's like yacht clubs and, you know, Lake Ontario's there, which for people who've never visited, when you hear lake, you probably think large body of water. Lake Ontario, quite literally, is a great lake. It's very big, and it's not like your typical lake that you would go out on in a canoe or something. It's a significant body of water.
Can you see across it? Like, can
I
you
don't think
see?
so.
Yeah, like it's huge.
If so, it'd be the kind of thing where there'd just be this, like, I think it takes like a couple hours to boat across it. So yeah, I don't think you'd be able to see. Maybe on a crystal clear day, you'd be able to see something. Let's go with that. But they end up leaving the party. After they leave, they stop at one of the 6's home. He wasn't with them at the party, but they stop at his house and collect him. And that is the last known sighting of the boys, or the last time they're actually seen. I think the first thing that raises concern is a couple hours later, and we'll get back to what we know about their whereabouts, but a couple hours later, after leaving to goof around on a boat, stopping at one of their houses and collecting them, they don't arrive back at the party, and one of their girlfriends makes the first call to police.
I think around 3:30 a.m. There were
Okay.
a couple girlfriends that were like they should be back by now. So I
Mhm.
think they tried to report them missing, and the police were like, if they don't show up by like later in the morning, come back with their parents.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
they
because
did.
there was two separate calls to, missing persons reports or whatever at 3:30. The first one, like you said, it's, they haven't been back. They've been gone for 3 hours. I'm not surprised that the police didn't, all hands on deck jump into that.
Right.
But hindsight being 2020, oh my God, it would have made a difference, I think, if they did.
Well, and I can see why the girlfriends would have been super worried right away. Water is water and drunk teens. That's not good.
Yeah,
That
oh yeah,
is bad.
yeah.
Like,
Water and alcohol do not
yeah.
go well together, and it doesn't. And then, without experienced swimmers and boat drivers and all this stuff, yeah,
Well, and
that
I
is a bad
imagine
mix.
they had done this before and always came back. So when they
Mhm.
didn't, they were like, ooh, something's up.
So here's what we know about what they did do or where they did go is there's really two clips of surveillance or CCTV footage that tell the story. One shows a group of the boys, a group of the six, stealing beer from a boat. So I guess that, just climbing on the boat and going into a fridge and taking a few beer. And then another clip simply shows them entering the marina where all the boats are. In either video, you don't see everyone together. So there's still some um, loose ends about if they were all there or not, but we do know that that some of them were there. They were all together earlier in the night, hours before, and they were stealing beer, at least from one boat, which again, I understand is something that they had done before.
They were familiar with that specific boat.
Yeah. And then, and this is what's interesting in this story, despite getting, well, one of the many things that's interesting, despite having so much conversation about it and so much coverage on different YouTubers and bloggers and all this stuff, there's really only a few details that you can go on. So they leave the party to go goof around on a boat. They're seen entering the marina through horrible quality CCTV footage and are videoed stealing liquor or beer or whatever from one of the boats on horrible CCTV footage. They're never seen again. Coincidentally, a boat and I think they call it an aqua bike or a water tricycle, are reported missing from that marina the next day by the owners. So putting, two and two together and tying it all together, the police the next day, when I think it was actually 2 days later, when they started putting this all together, when they realized, oh, there's 6 boys who are missing, and now we have a boat and a water tricycle reported missing. This may all be connected. We got to start searching Lake Ontario. Before we get into the search and what they found, did you look at any videos or pictures of a water tricycle?
I sure did. They look like a lot of fun.
They look amazing. So a water
And also they
tricycle,
look easy to steal.
oh yeah,
Yeah.
it basically looks like a giant tricycle, but instead of like big wheels, it has like, well, I guess it has huge wheels that are hollow plastic, so they would float. So if you were driving one of those in the water, you would be bobbing up and down on top of waves and
It's
whatnot.
like a
And
paddle boat tricycle.
yeah, it's hard to explain, but the wheels kind of have the paddles built into them. So
Right.
as you're pedaling and the wheels are spinning, the paddles are turning and propelling you forward. It doesn't look like the kind of thing that you would, sink and drown. Like to me, it doesn't look like something dangerous at all. And then the other thing is the boat that's missing, and this will become important. So the water tricycle is something that's traditionally not dangerous. The boat that was missing is called, it was an imitation version of a model called a Boston Whaler, which is advertised as an unsinkable boat. It's like a small, what I would call like a small fishing boat. But what makes this style of boat unique is that inside the boat, like the way it's constructed, of course, it's like fiberglass or plastic or whatever, but inside it's full of this like styrofoam kind of foam stuff that's buoyant. So they say you could take one of these boats and you could saw it right down the middle, and it would then just be two things floating on top of the water. You could fill it with water and it will just sit on top of the water. It's advertised and promoted and largely thought to be an unsinkable boat. The reason I lean on that is because the boat was missing, the water tricycle is missing, the six boys are missing. None of it was ever found in a lake that is a confined space that was searched by a variety of using a variety of means. They have never found any sign, with I guess with one minor exception, and this also seems to have a bit of a star. They found something on the other side of the lake. I think it's about 120 kilometers across, which would have been in New York. You know what I'm
Yeah.
talking about?
Where was it? I should
It
have this
was.
right in front of me. Somewhere in New
They,
York.
yeah, but what did they find in New York?
A gas can from
Yeah,
what would have been an imitation Boston whaler,
yeah,
but nothing has been definitively proven that this
yeah.
belonged to the boat.
I found like what I found interesting is why did they even go through the trouble? Like someone in New York or some business on the waterfront somewhere in New York, a gas can floats up. I wonder why they even took the trouble to report it because it was found like it wasn't like days later. I think it was found like way
Two
after the
weeks?
fact.
I think it was
Yeah,
2 weeks after.
I'm surprised that it even got brought to the surface as far as attention goes, and they couldn't rule it out as being, that this definitely isn't from that boat. It's at least consistent with the type of gas can that would
Right.
have been on that style of boat. But aside from that, there's literally nothing.
That boat wasn't one of a kind, so
No, and it wasn't said to be in great condition. It was a little older, but still the fact that to sink that boat would be a chore. That said, we'll get into some theories at the end. But that said, if someone finds a boat floating around with no people in it, they may just take that boat. So that boat could, who knows where it is at this point. But I think the many people who know boats better than you and I do have said, yeah, that boat didn't sink. I don't believe it.
oh.
Yeah. So we'll see. But we'll get into some theories as we go.
I'm skeptical because like the Titanic was supposed to be unsinkable too. So
Yeah, saying a boat is
yeah.
unsinkable, it's
It's
come on.
water. It's pretty unforgiving. Like,
Yeah, but that said, you feel some Titanic's a different story because it's just this
right.
massive metal thing. But take a small thing that's stuffed with like, packed with this styrofoam sort of stuff that's buoyant. Um, you could break it into 100 pieces, and then there's just going to be 100 pieces of styrofoam floating around on the surface. They never found anything like that, and
Exactly.
that's yeah. And this was described as a massive search. We're talking thousands of volunteers on foot, marine units of police, sea helicopters, basically, any means they could to search Lake Ontario. Nothing.
Well, and they started like as soon as they realized that the boys were reported missing and then the two reported watercrafts were reported missing, they started the search. So like they couldn't have gotten far, you know? It's
Yeah,
just
and
like it doesn't add up. Like if they had
yeah.
started the search weeks later, I would have said like, okay, what are you expecting to find? But like they
Mhm.
didn't, there wasn't too many hours that passed.
Yeah, it was as far as like getting out there on the water and finding a boat with a couple like thirsty guys in it. I think it was too late for that, but it wasn't so late that no sign of anything. And
Right.
again, we're talking now almost 30 years later. Nobody washed ashore of six. The boat never washed ashore or turned up. Like I think like all of that is such a mystery, and seems unusual in a lake as opposed to far into the ocean or something of that nature. There's a lot of little kind of details that surface but don't go anywhere, and it's really hard to get to the source of where this info came from. One thing that has been said is that at one point there was a shipwreck located but not investigated. Do you know anything about where that came from?
Or reported. No, I have no idea. I read it somewhere.
Yeah, and
I
there's
can't
quite
remember where I would have read that,
yeah,
but
and there's quite a bit of that. And fortunately for this story, there's one guy in particular who really he's a private investigator turned, I guess, turned author, that's really connected to the story. His name is Bruce Ricketts. In about 2010, he took on the case, I think, as I don't think he was like hired by anyone. My understanding is he just kind of like got interested and took it on. And he has been like, if you read about this story, you will find his name and his work and him writing over and over again through the story. He's like recently published a book about it. He seems to maintain most of the Facebook content, either maintain or curate or just, communicate on. So a lot of things that have, come and went over the years are stuff that he's been able to get to the surface through, the private investigating kind of digging and those means. But again, nothing like of value that would lead anywhere. The biggest lead, it seems, over the last several years that's been discussed is Bruce Ricketts, the PI. He got access to the full, I believe, 16-hour long copy of the CCTV footage from the Marina the night that the boys were there and the night that the boys went missing. He watched it and examined it all. And again, I skimmed through it. He published it on YouTube and on Facebook. It's very, very poor quality. Like, one thing in watching it, I realized how much or the improvements in CCTV footage from 1995 to 2023, I think we're in. But anyway, in watching it, the biggest lead that seemed to come up is right around the same time that the boys enter and are there. You see a couple other people enter separately. You can't really see, it's hard to even say if it's male or female. At one point, they're thought to be pointing at something, but it's even hard to tell. But the biggest piece of info to come out is that it looks like there was at least someone else there that night that may have seen something. So there was a lot of media coverage reaching out to, like, if you were these people that were there, come forward, maybe you saw something. But as far as like eyewitness accounts of the boys being there or doing anything other than the CCTV footage that we've talked about, the only other thing is someone who lives not far from there reported hearing the sound of a boat's engine around 3 a.m, which would have been about the right time if they did get on a boat and start it up and go out in the water. So I think it's reasonable to think that the boats being stolen and the boys being there and disappearing are all connected. It would be a pretty big coincidence. I've heard speculation that somebody had used the disappearance of the boys as a way to, wreck their boat and get insurance, like something like that. And I'm like, well, that seems like how evil would you have to be? Oh, those kids are missing. I'm going to make it look like they took my boat and get the $3,000.
right, the three
I
grand.
whatever. I don't know what the boat's worth, but probably more than that. But it's still, I don't believe that. I think when you look at the facts of this case, if they have a history of sneaking on boats and stealing stuff and maybe taking boats, I'm thinking a group of 17, 18-year-olds are down on the water at the marina and see an unlocked water tricycle. One member of that group is going to be like, I'm getting on it. Watch this.
If not more. At the very least, one party.
Yeah, exactly. There's no way one doesn't. It's human nature. Starting the boat and going out in the water is a different story. I think that would be at the part where somebody in the group is like, whoa, like, this is going a little far. But I
have this feeling that they weren't out to like trash this boat. They were going to take it out for a joyride and probably bring it back. They probably had done it before. The keys were probably under the seat or under the mat. I know farmers here leave their keys to their tractors under the mat, and kids in small towns like steal tractors and just like move them.
Really? Is cow tipping actually a thing?
I've definitely never done it. I've heard of it. And I'm like, that sounds weird. That sounds hard. Do you know how much a cow weighs?
Well, so what you do, cow tipping, is the cow's asleep in the field and you can push it and it'll just fall over, right?
Yeah, I don't know. Something about that doesn't make sense to me. I've heard about people doing this and I'm like, If that's
Okay.
true, that's weird.
Yeah, it is. Well, joyriding a boat in the middle of the night's a little weird, but again, it's that's besides the point. Let's say, just for the sake of argument, the boys get in a boat or on that tricycle or both, and they end up in the water. Or they end up out in the water in these vehicles. How do they end up disappearing?
That's what it comes down to. And
Hmm.
police were pretty quick after 2 days of searching. They were like, okay, well, it's pretty obvious they like capsized and either drowned or succumbed to hypothermia or and
Which
they're
which
gone.
in March it wouldn't take long. You end up in the water in March. I think you're
And
not going to last very long.
I already mentioned this, but I often underestimate how unforgivable water is.
Hmm.
Like that, Lake Ontario is deep and cold. Some things
Hmm.
sink and don't come back up.
Yeah, and if you're out a good
So,
ways, it's pitch dark.
oof.
The other thing too is it if you've spent lots of times in pools and lakes and oceans and rivers and all this stuff, if you swim with a lot of people, if anyone's ever having trouble and you try to help them, or even if you're just kind of wrestling around in the water, if you have someone else grabbing you, it's really hard to swim. And I think when I hear this story and try to imagine what had happened, I'm thinking six guys with their clothes on. If one of them ends up in the water and one or two of them jump in to help them, I think it very quickly could devolve into a super dangerous situation. And, if for whatever, if it, but again, none of them come back. So something has to happen that leads to all six of them in the water. And it's like, I
Right.
can't imagine like one guy falls and someone jumps in to help him. Then someone jumps in to help the two of them, you know,
Well, and
event.
not only do none of the boys come back, but the boats don't come back. Not a
Mhm.
hat comes back, a jacket, a shoe, like
Well,
nothing returns.
we can get into this whole idea of there was a pair of red pants that
Oh,
had washed
right.
up uh, on the U.S. side, I believe.
Well, the remains of two bodies were found along the Niagara River, and one was wearing these red pants.
Yes, that's right. And I've read multiple things about these bodies in the Niagara River, but what ultimately convinced me that this is likely unrelated is there was an expert. I don't know what field of science it is, but that studies, the direction of water and tides and currents and all this stuff. And what their ruling was that it would be, or their opinion was that it would be impossible that these would be the boys because the body of water that this was all found in fed into Lake Ontario, and it wouldn't be something that would like wash down that way. Like they would have had to actually
Oh,
driven the boat down that way, and it wouldn't have made sense to go that far.
okay.
And but then again, I've also read on a bunch of places that people are like, no, this is for sure at least two of them. So the way that expert phrased it and gave their opinion, I was like, yeah, I'm agreeing with this person. But the two bodies were never tested for DNA. There was actually like a civilian kind of, I don't know if it was GoFundMe, but it was like something like that where they were trying to raise money to have DNA testing done. I don't believe it was ever completed. Last I saw was a couple years back. They were still trying to raise some money for this, which seems like for the sake of just making the families feel better, someone should have just, the police, like, how much does it cost to test DNA when
Well,
you,
and
you know,
it can't be much. Like,
you wouldn't think, right?
especially for a high profile case like this. But I don't work there, so I don't know.
Yeah. We don't know for sure. DNA didn't confirm or rule out or whatever who it is. But one thing that has become a talking point is one of the remains that were found had a pair of red pants on. One of the missing boys was believed to have been, or had regularly wore a pair of red Levi's and was believed to have been wearing them when they disappeared. This was Chad Smith, or no, sorry, it was Danny Higgins, I believe, that had the.
I think it was Jay Boyle.
It was Jay Boyle. Oh,
Yeah,
yes, you're
they
right.
were his pants.
Yeah. Um, the pants nowadays, they were reported as being found as red, but they've been in the water so long that they actually look more like orange. So there's some debate about, are they red pants or are they orange pants? Are they Levi's or are they not Levi's?
Well, it's
So it's
reported that he was wearing red Levi, like they were jeans, they were denim.
Yeah.
And once Bruce Ricketts actually got his hands on these pants that had been like lost in translation for years, they were, yeah, not only orange, but a different fabric altogether.
Okay.
Which leads to the question, was the evidence improperly documented or tampered with?
So when I think of this story and I try to guess what may have happened, um, or at least try to come up with something that would even make sense, really the only things that I come up with is someone fell in, or two people fell in and others tried to help them, and it became even worse. And this is the what ended up happening. But that wouldn't explain the disappearance of the boat and the aqua tricycle, water tricycle. So then I think, well, maybe the two boats, they were out there and the boat hit the water tricycle or whatever, and they both got damaged and sunk. That doesn't necessarily ring true to me either.
Unless someone tied an anchor to it, it shouldn't have sank.
That's a good point. And that opens the door for that discussion. Is there is some speculation there could be foul play. That said, I've never seen anything compelling to tell me that these boys were at any risk of anything. Like, people had talked about this body of water being used by drug traffickers. Maybe it was, but why would a drug trafficker, like what are the chances that these guys joyriding a boat and a water tricycle would end up becoming targets for this group of drug traffickers who would just want to get the drugs across and get home without causing a scene?
What if they weren't targets, though? And what if they were just in the wrong place at the wrong time? Saw something they shouldn't have, and
yeah,
the boats were never seen again.
Like, it could be, but there's lots of things you could, like, yeah, that could have happened.
It's just a theory.
It's a theory, but without any strong backup. Like, it's just something you can't rule it out. There's no way to say, no, that definitely didn't happen. It's something like that could help explain it.
I think it's just because it's such an unexplainable case. People reach for ideas. They're like, okay, what could have happened?
Yeah, like, I feel you could probably sit down with a pen and paper and write 50 ideas. Like, here's 50 things that could explain the disappearance of 6 boys, a boat, and a water tricycle in Lake Ontario. And actually, I think you'd have a hard time coming up with 50.
50, yeah. 10, maybe.
And you could say, whether you want to say drug traffickers, it could be, you could say anybody who didn't want to be seen on the water was seen by the boys. They got the boys and hid the boat and hid the water tricycle. Something, I don't know, they covered it in concrete and sunk it to the bottom. Whether it's a drug trafficker or some guy who's out there because he just killed his wife and he's hiding the body, and they see him hiding his wife's body. And
totally. But you know what? Stranger things, man. Like, some weird shit has happened. So I don't put anything off the table.
Imagine living in Pickering at this time, being in like school with these kids and being like, right? 6 of my friends disappeared.
That would rattle your high school.
Yeah, and I think they're from different parts of Ontario, of that, I don't know what you would call it, the Toronto area. They were from different areas, so I don't think they went to the same school, but they were at least in the same social group.
Yeah, definitely.
And 6 people, that's a big group of people. Like, I know in high school, I had a friend who died in a car accident with a drunk driver, and that was like such a shock, and it rocked everybody, and like, it was such a huge kind of moment in my childhood and for everyone in my community. Imagine 6 people at once in a way that you can't even explain what happened to them. They just vanished. Unimaginable.
Yeah.
And like like last week when we talked, or 2 weeks ago when we talked about the Jack family, I guess it's a similar thing. I guess it's a bit different because it's a family with that was like kids and adults, where this is just a group of young, healthy boys starting their life. I can't imagine an accident going so wrong that not one of them is able to make it out.
Right. It's just, it seems implausible.
Mm-hmm. One other theory that gets tossed around a lot, and so we'll make sure we put this on our list of 10 or 50 ideas, is Lake Ontario has cargo ships, boats going back and forth from US to Canada, delivering goods. And they're like, yes, it's a lake. And so when people think of lake, they think of small, fishing boats or whatever, recreational vehicles puttering around. These cargo ships are like giant ships. And if you at night, if at night you got in the way of one of them,
You
that
would be
boat,
demolished.
it would take you out. And when we talk about something breaking one of those boats into 1,000 pieces, this would be the kind of thing that could do it. So a lot of people who are trying to come up with an explanation of how they all end up in the water and the boat and water tricycle end up disappearing. The idea that they got in front of a cargo ship accidentally is it would make sense, or it's a theory that would explain it. However, cargo ships keep tight records, and there's no record of one of those boats traveling that night. So it's kind of a dead lead.
Yeah. What if the drug smugglers had a cargo ship?
A drug smuggler would, speaking on behalf of the drug smuggling community that I'm like entrenched in, they would have like a quiet boat that is fast. So they would have like a small,
Not a cargo ship.
they wouldn't have a cargo ship. Across Lake Ontario. They would travel in like a small little
I'm just
like
throwing out ideas.
your idea is that drug smugglers in a cargo ship. No, it would be a drug smugglers would, because it's not like they're taking a cargo ship of drugs. They have like a couple suitcases
I
of it.
guess.
They would have a small boat that's fast and quiet and able to, get the job done quickly and evade detection from, Coast Guard or police or, whoever's going to be watching.
Not a massive cargo ship.
No, I don't think that's it.
Perhaps I was just thinking out loud. Let's move on.
I'm definitely not editing that out, though. That's in. Another theory, anytime you talk about a missing persons case, this will come up. What if these 6 boys have decided that, life in Pickering isn't what they want? They're all together going to fake this event as a way to cover their tracks so they can go to God knows where and start life anew. That theory comes up as a possible explanation in pretty much every missing persons case. I cannot imagine a group of 16, 17, 18-year-olds make that decision and all stick to it.
Make
all
that
these
pact, and no.
I could see them making the pact to like do something nuts. Like, let's all just, take a boat and go across the water, go to New York and gamble, something like this. But
not start a new life.
No, in whatever you were into or doing or decisions you made at 16, 17, 18, you would have changed your mind 100 times by the time you were 26. So the idea that all 6 of them don't return, I don't see any merit. I can't imagine a world in which that happens.
No, and to do it successfully, they started searching long before they could get far enough to disappear for good.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, and I think it goes without saying is there's been no activity on bank accounts or anything like that. Like there's no sign of life from any of these boys, other than a couple. And actually, this is another thing that seems to be a consistent kind of feature of missing persons cases. There have been several unconfirmed sightings. One of the boys was thought to be seen walking down the highway. One was thought to be, or walking down a road in the direction of his house, I think. One was thought to be seen at like a Burger King.
In New York.
But all of these sightings, none were able to be corroborated to be them. It was just kind of like tips that came in when police and investigators and media were soliciting tips.
Right. And yeah, when you're looking for someone, everyone's got a doppelganger or two. So when you're actively like searching for someone, people are gonna are gonna fit that.
Mhm. Yeah. And it's again, it always comes up, but it's just a tip that with so little to go on in this case.
Eyewitness accounts are never reliable.
Exactly.
Like, yeah, two
Um,
people can watch the same thing and remember it differently. So
in Bruce Ricketts' work, he's the private investigator that is largely, at least the public side of this investigation, he's leading it, wrote a book about it, blogs about it regularly, and does a lot of interviews about it, or at least did. Um, he got a lot of documents from both American and Canadian officials concerning the investigation and the search for these boys, with a complaint from him and being echoed by family members and media that the documents they're receiving are heavily redacted to the point of almost being useful, with like full paragraphs, considerable amounts of details being redacted. That's one thing I cannot get my head around, is why, after almost 30 years, what they would be hiding or protecting if they didn't see it as an investigation into like a possible homicide or something. I just feel like at this point, it's with the passage of time and with what's at least what's known publicly, there doesn't seem to be a very good reason to hold your cards that tight after all these years.
right. And well, even getting the security footage that looks like it was recorded on a toaster.
Yeah,
It took him
an old
multiple,
toaster.
yes, it took him multiple tries to get that, and they told him it didn't exist at one point.
Mhm.
It's like,
Well,
what's going on here?
Um, but yeah, when you say recorded on a toaster, like it is such awful, awful quality. It's a shame. And at no point do you see all the boys together on the video. So it's still like speculation. Were they even there together? And then on top of that, the the video and what cameras are recording is a little sketchy. It looks like one of kind of the main, most important cameras that would have been looking in the area where the action would have happened was off for the majority of the night without any explanation why it wasn't recording.
Yeah. But what if one of the boys purposely shut it down? They were so familiar with the marina. They were like, take care of that security camera.
Like Jason Bourne, he like climbed up.
You never
Yeah,
know.
like cameras down, we're getting the boats.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't see it being that. Maybe we got to hide from the international drug smugglers in the cargo ship. I don't see that being likely, but I think it's, that when you look at the quality of the video taken by this CCTV camera, I also would say it probably is the type of camera that's not that reliable.
That's true.
Um,
I'd bet it being faulty over tampered with.
yeah, and you hear so many and talk about and read about so many stories where there was a camera pointed right where you wanted to see, and for whatever, the tape was taped over, or the thing wasn't on, or it wasn't even a real camera, it's been broken for years, but we just keep it there because it makes the hotel look safe, that sort of thing. But when push comes to shove, like with so many of these mysteries, if there had only been a working quality camera, it would save a lot of people 30 years of, where is my son and his friends? And uh, it's um it's just unimaginable. And again, one of them went missing with a young daughter who's now like a woman.
Yeah, she's like
Would
almost 30. She'd be like my
Yeah,
age.
never known her dad. We of course wouldn't have memories of from being a baby, but to be brought up with among the shadow of like, yeah, we don't necessarily know what happened to him. And
It's all circumstantial.
yeah, it just would make the most sense that they ended up on that boat, or a
Right.
boat. At this point, if they haven't been found, I can't imagine that there will be an end to this one way or another. It will take, well, I guess it could take some technology, like radar that scans the bottom of the water and stuff. Like if you watch these kind of, so it bothers me. If you watch like the treasure hunting shows, like The Curse of Oak Island, they spend like hundreds of thousands of dollars working on this stuff that looks into the ground, and they're digging, hoping to find gold, and they end up not finding anything. Can they not just make a documentary show called like Finding the Lost Boys of Pickering, where they just go out on the water with a big budget and spend money using some kind of radar to scan the bottom for a wreckage of
And like
a
at the
water
very
tricycle?
least, they'd probably find something. They'd
That would
find
that
a
would justify a season two of the
yeah,
show.
exactly.
Um,
But
but there,
well, when I posted on TikTok, there were many comments, and lots of people claimed that there are like it's so deep that it's unsearchable, and there are like 150-year-old shipwrecks on the bottom of Lake Ontario that are just like
really,
sitting there. I don't know. I haven't looked into this. And
well, if
I believe anything I'm told.
exactly, yeah.
So,
If so, that's fascinating. And I love this idea of just like these mysteries that are just kind of hiding around us. And, there's the human mysteries, like what we're talking about now with like a missing persons case. But then the mysteries like below water, like what's deep under there, and then there's a bunch of mud. What's under that mud? And
it's the fact that they know more about space than the ocean. Like it's
yeah.
scary.
Yeah, I'm
Water
also
is terrifying
yeah, it's yeah, and it's dark and it's mysterious. I'm a
and
big
unforgiving.
fan. Yeah, I'm a fan of the writing and only the writing of H.P. Lovecraft, who he was a writer from back in the day, but he wrote a lot of short kind of they call it weird fiction, which is just kind of I guess something between sci-fi, fantasy, and horror short stories. And he had quite a few that would be set in things coming out of the water or deep down in the water. You would find this temple of this like lost race that existed 100,000 million years ago or whatever. And it's just always left me with this idea of like there's some weird cool stuff down there. But in this case, I think it's highly likely that there is a water tricycle and another boat down there, or at least evidence of it. And if you could crack a case like this at this point, that'd be a huge feather in a cap for some kind of like, I don't know, exploratory research water kind of company. Why doesn't some upstart company just solve this?
Yeah, I don't know. I wish
Maybe,
I had
maybe,
the money to. I don't, but
maybe it's easier said than done. It could be one of those things.
I wonder because yeah,
I
like I
think
said, I
likely.
often underestimate how how deep the natural bodies of water can be.
Yeah. And then again, Lake Ontario, the name lake makes me think of the lakes that I swim in Nova Scotia, which even my area, like not far from Halifax, is a place called Dartmouth that a lot of people call the city of lakes because it's just a whole bunch of lakes. But these are the kind of lakes where you can almost throw a rock across them if you got a good arm.
Those are the
Lake
lakes I'm also familiar with.
and most people are, or a large lake with a bunch of cottages around it. This is an altogether different thing. When you're on Lake Ontario, it feels more like the mouth of an ocean. Like it feels more like you're on a harbor into the ocean or whatever. So it's a different lake, I think, than most people would imagine in their heads. But again, six boys go missing in it without any sign is it's unusual and it's it's unusual and it's unimaginable what it would be like to be associated with these boys and and live with this. In the chat, Thomas says Lake Ontario is 7,300 square miles. So that's not cottage country lake.
That doesn't really mean anything to me.
I'm not
What's
gonna
it like? How big's a square mile?
1 mile this way, 1 mile that way in a big square.
Oh, like flooring.
Okay, I've never seen you work so hard.
I'm
Weird.
reading.
The lights in the room are flashing as you're trying to figure that out. And I see the clock behind you is just spinning. It's like there's an electrical interference. I'm not gonna make fun of you. I'm holding myself back so hard.
Anymore.
Well, Maddie, do you see any world in which, or do you see any possibility this case gets progressed any further? I think, Bruce Ricketts, a PI that takes it on, that's an investigator, writer, researcher, crowdfunder, all this stuff. I think he's done incredible work getting the story public and propelling it forward. but it needs even more than that. So I don't know, short
Even
of luck or chance.
Well, even if someone were to come forward and say, I was that person in the parking lot, and this is what I saw, or this is what I heard, I could call that in and say something. We don't have any evidence of anything.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, it's other than a huge, like you said, stroke of luck, fluke. I don't know. I don't know if this will ever be solved.
Mhm. Do you, off the top of your head, can you think of any other case like this where it's a group of, other than the Jack family, where it's a group of young people together disappearing?
Not
I
not off the top of my head.
I can think of, like, I've heard a few stories of like being found dead, a group, and that's not necessarily certain what happened to them or what led to it, but just to disappear.
Yeah, like I've
And
heard
no
of
one
like
washes ashore.
suicide pacts among
Mhm,
teenage friends,
mhm.
but never something like this, and never
Yeah,
like a
and
successful runaway.
yeah, oh yeah, and I don't give any credibility or any
No.
thought to the idea that they ran off. And just, I know you brought up pact, not in terms of this case being a possibility, but just in something that could happen. There's no evidence that anything
No.
like that. I think it's, in my mind, this is pretty clearly a case of death by misadventure. That's how I would, if I had to put my cards down on what on where I think it, put my chips down where I think the answer is. I think that would be the broad stroke of what I think happened. But what specifically happened, I don't know. I'm going to have to come up with that list of 10
And
to 50
yeah, I
ideas.
don't think anyone knows. Yeah, I definitely agree that something bad happened that night and the boys obviously met their demise, but the details,
Mhm.
I'm not
It,
sure.
it's kind of ripe for a good documentary, but I think there's just not enough information. Like, we talked about the disappearance of Kenley Matheson, and we watched like a 6-hour documentary series about his disappearance. And both of us criticized it for kind of dragging on too long and leaning on unnecessary details. I think if you were going to do something about the Pickering Lost Boys, you'd run into the same problem. There's just probably not enough to go through. Um,
They could easily make that 90 minutes though. Easy.
yeah,
Yeah,
it would be
it doesn't need to be 6 parts.
it could be a 90-minute documentary if family and friends were willing to be involved and talk about more about the boys and who they are and what their life was like. Because there's just not enough to the story as far as details. It's just because it's all just, you just have these little moments. They left the party. They were seen going into the marina stealing liquor. They picked up someone on the way. One of the boys wasn't at the party, came with them along the way. Boats were reported missing. That's it.
That's it. What if they got into a car along the way? Like, we don't know.
Exactly. Yeah.
There's a million,
If
well, at least
only,
10 to 50.
even if they had video of them getting on a boat, starting it, and driving out, you'd be like, okay, they're clear in the water. Because like, this could end up, it's not impossible that this could end up being solved and have nothing to do with the water. Because there is no,
Could you
uh,
imagine? There's no
yeah,
solid proof putting them on the water. So,
it's
yeah.
circumstantial, but it is a pretty big coincidence that they were there and a boat went missing. But yeah, it's not a given. Well, that'd be shocking.
Oh,
Um,
now I hope that something like that is found like kilometers away on land. Could you imagine?
well, as long as, if there's an answer out there, I would just hope it gets back to the right people, whatever it
No.
is. But we'll see. Well, we'll start wrapping this up. Before we do, we always end with you telling us what you're working on next. You put up the video of you fighting with your cats to record something. Is that what you're working on? And what is it?
Um, no, that was this week's project, me fighting with the tiny dictators. But for next week, I just recently found out, someone on TikTok told me about the Lake Anjakuni village, which is a village in Nunavut, the Northwest Territories. And in 1930, this village of like 25 to 30 people just kind of vanished.
Oh, you told me about that.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I'm unsure of how I want to present this because this is also another story with not a ton of information. And because it's 93 years old, even the original storytelling is like a little bit dicey and facts are hard to know. So I'm not sure how I want to present it yet, but I definitely want to talk about it.
I had never heard of that story until you sent me the article, so I look forward to seeing what you do with it. But yeah, it's not easy to dig up something that happened. Even if you're covering something pre-internet, it's a whole different beast. Fortunately for me, I talk about this on my show a lot, 'cause I'm so grateful to have it. But in Nova Scotia, there's something called the Public Archives, which is funded by the provincial government, which is basically a building near Dalhousie University that is just a massive collection of newspapers and public records like death and marriage records going back like an eternity. So if I'm ever covering something, I can, I don't know, let's say in 1975, someone saw a UFO. I can go to the public archives without paying any money, just as a citizen, and start going through these dusty old cabinets, getting all the newspapers from different parts of Nova Scotia from that day, the day before, the day after, and scrolling through them all. It's not the physical papers that like everything's scanned on like these little like microfilm cassette sort of things, but it's really cool.
Is it like a big machine and you like turn it to like
Exactly.
get the next slide? That's so cool. I've only seen those in the movies.
Oh yeah, they exist, and
I'm so
it's
jealous.
very cool for research. One of the things that was my favorite experience there is, I don't know if I ever told you this story, but I'm like obsessed with stories that take place in or around or involve Tim Hortons in some way. And when I was in high school in Cape Breton, we had this thing that happened where someone thought they saw the face of the Virgin Mary on the brick wall of the Tim Hortons in Cape Breton, near where I'm from. And they thought they saw it, so they told a few friends who also thought they saw the Virgin Mary's face on the bricks, who told a few more friends. And very quickly, it went from like, 50 people in the parking lot at Tim Hortons looking at this to, busloads of people from across the country coming to Cape Breton. And I have video of it that's so nuts. It looks like Woodstock. There's just like, as far as the eye can see, people and cars, they're walking up, touching the bricks and crying and holding babies up to the bricks where you can kind of see, it's like there's a light kind of shining down on the bricks and it sort of has the look of a face. But anyway, I was doing an episode about Jesus Christ's, I was saying the Virgin Mary. Sorry, they thought it was Jesus himself, Jesus Christ's face. I did an episode called like Jesus Christ's appearance at Tim Hortons or something. And so I went to the archives and I got all the papers from across Nova Scotia and even further across Canada to get like a sense of how the media was reporting on this crazy thing. And it was really cool to find that and see it, because I experienced it firsthand as a kid. And
when did you say late 90s this was?
Yeah, I was in high school. It would have been like 95, 94.
Oh my.
And it was a time they almost like, it was so bad they almost had to close the highway, the main highway entering Cape Breton, because that's where the Tim Hortons was. It was kind of off to the side from the highway. Like you'd have to take a turn off the highway sort of thing to get to where this Tim Hortons was. But so many people were there and they were parking along the highway that it was just a matter of time before someone got smoked. But what they ended up doing was the Tim Hortons was so concerned about being sued for someone like getting killed or hurt on their property with these crowds. They ended up trying to solve the problem. They removed all the lights on the outside of the building and put a different style of lighting, and the face was gone.
And Jesus left.
Yeah, that's basically what happened.
Oh my God.
But yeah, I have a few videos that I got from different people who were there at the time with their like, the big VHS
I was just going to say, you had a camcorder?
Oh, it wasn't my video, just other people who were there that saw it or that filmed it at the time. But anyway, that's just an example of the benefit of having access to something like that. And, maybe if you went to Nunavut or wherever that you said that story had taken place, there'd be something similar where somebody could find the original reporting. But I have a feeling you're not funded to be able to jump on a plane and go out there and figure that out yourself.
Unfortunately, I'm not. I would go to the Northwest Territories in a second, My friend went there once and it was beautiful, and my dad's been there. But no, I can't jump on a plane tomorrow and go just to see if they have public archives.
Neither can I, and because of that, I will watch your video and get taken there by your storytelling.
Perfect.
Madelayne, I'm always happy to have you here and happy to discuss these cases with you. So thanks for joining me tonight.
Thank you for having me.
I want to thank you for joining Madelayne and I for this episode of Nighttime. If you're interested in hearing more about the Pickering Lost Boys, I've added a link to private investigator Bruce Ricketts' website. Also, if you have a theory on this case you'd like to share, please let me know in a voice memo. I can include and respond to it in my monthly listener mail episode. And with that said, I'm going to start wrapping up this episode, but before I do, I'm going to give thanks. First, a big thanks to Maddie for sharing another evening with me and with you, the listeners of Nighttime. A big thanks to Monty Datta, who contributes the music for this series, and a shout out to LJ from the Dystopian Simulation podcast, who provides the intro and outro voiceovers. But lastly, and most importantly, I have a massive thank you to everyone who listens to Nighttime, as without your interest and your support, this show would be as pointless as it would be impossible. And on the topic of support, let me thank the newest subscribers to the premium feed. Muffy, Carrie, and Kimberly, thank you for going premium. If anyone else would like to support the show but can't do it by way of a premium feed subscription, you can give me a big hand by simply sharing this episode on social media and letting some like-minded friends know what we're doing here. If you have any story ideas, if you want to give feedback on the show, you can reach me at nighttimepodcast.com. I hope to hear from you. But until then, take care of each other, hug your loved ones tight, and let me know if you see anything weird.
The Nighttime Podcast is written, hosted, and produced by Jordan Bonaparte.